I'm continuing with this theme of people who help me. I'll have three or four more. There are just a few people in my life whose writings have really impacted me. One of them is Viktor Frankl. I first came across his famous book, Man's Search for Meaning, way back in high school when I became serious about being a Christian. For some reason, our pastor recommended this book to me. I had a really good pastor, but this book is really not Christian at all. And looking back, I thought, wow, it's pretty broad-minded of him to have recommended a book that really comes more from an existential perspective than a Christian perspective. But even at the time, it helped me. And as I've gone on through life, it has become more and more meaningful to me. Viktor Frankl was a Jew who he and his wife were rounded up and sent to the concentration camps. They came to that horrible place where they decide, which one are you going to? And if you went to one, Auschwitz, then you, got to live, had the privilege of living in this horrible condition. If you didn't, then you went to the gas chambers. Of course, they didn't know that at the time, but that's what happened. His wife was sent to the gas chambers and he wound up in Auschwitz. And so he spent a few years there. And as he went through that horrible experience, he was a psychologist and he used it as a chance to study what it is that gives people the will to live, and talk about a grim laboratory for that. But that study is actually what gave him the will to live, which leads into his discovery, which he called in the end logotherapy or meaning therapy. What he believed is that there is no big answer to what is the meaning of life. He famously says, we ask life, what is the meaning? But really, we should be turning that around. It's life that's asking us, what is the meaning of your life? In other words, you really can't find, there is no easy, obvious why to life. It's really on us to create the why. And you can see how that really lines up with facing up and what I call, wonder and adventure, just facing that we don't know and choosing an adventure or, an expression of your life that's meaningful to you. In one of the little ditties I write, I find the songs that to me matter and sing them till the day I splatter. Okay, so that's logotherapy. Another thing that Frankl said is that he who has a why can deal with almost any how. And so what he did is he tried to help people look at their lives, whatever their condition. Say someone has terminal cancer. Well, you're not going to come up with what is the meaning of my life, in some ultimate way. But what you can say is, how will I bring meaning to my life with the time that I have? Maybe it would just be by the way that I face my death. Maybe it would be by the way that I reach out to people that I need to make amends with. Maybe it would be, you can fill in the blank. But the point is that it's on us to decide what the meaning of life is. Another sort of related in the existential world book that was put in my hands as a high school student was Camus' book, The Plague. Camus, of course, was an existentialist too. And The Plague is about this city, Oran, where a plague comes into the city and everyone's going to die, period. Everyone. And so they quarantine it off. There's no getting out. You're just stuck in Oran. And so then the question becomes, what's the point of life? How do you find meaning in Oran? And if you think about that, it's kind of grim, but there's some real parallels with our actual lives. Here we are on this globe. We're all going to die. There's no escape. How do you find meaning? So Camus uses this situation in Oran to sort of explore how different people try to find meaning in life. Now, I personally didn't find his presentation of that to be very compelling. I kind of got done with that book and said, well, what's the point? And I would say that is also true to me to some degree, also of Camus' book, which I read after that and have actually recently just reread, The Myth of Sisyphus. So this is again Camus who wrote this book about the myth of Sisyphus. Sisyphus is the Greek story about the person who was condemned in the afterlife to push a rock up the hill every day. And at the end of the day, it would roll back down and he would wake up and push it back up the hill. And then it would roll back down and they would push it up, and so on for all eternity. That's Sisyphus's fate. And again, here we are in this human condition where we look at our lives and that's how it can feel. I get up, I go to work, I make money, I pay my bills, I get up, I go to work, I make money. So where's the meaning in it? Again, for me, Camus doesn't give a very satisfying answer to that. It's basically, there's no changing that, but you can at least choose your attitude. And actually, there is something in that because, that is true. You can choose your attitude. The thing where I think Camus misses things a little bit is the fact that we are not condemned to do the same thing over and over until we die. We have more freedom, more flexibility to express ourselves with an adventure, a song, a life that is meaningful to us, that matters. If you're pushing a rock up and down the hill every day, maybe get another job, right? Something that's more meaningful. It won't change the fact that, that you're doomed and you're in Oran and you will die and there's no escaping that. But there is more flexibility, I guess is what I'm saying, to find meaning in life than that. So you can see how in my own life, when the bottom fell out, I faced what I call the three specters. And I consider these to be inescapable for human beings. In Yarus, we are here, but nobody really knows why. Vanitas, or vanity, right? There's no way to avoid death. There's no way to get to the happy ending. There's always, you always have to go back and start again. Echoes there, by the way, of the myth of Sisyphus, right? And then Rapax, the third specter, the fact that as much as we would like to think that this whole world is built on love and people just giving to each other, even in nature and in human nature, there is this principle where we're always kind of looking out for number one. And those three things tear away at the meaningful stories that we tell about life. And of course, I have, a whole way of dealing with that I call the three movements. So for each of those, you make a choice, and it is an existential choice. So in the face of our ignorance in Yarus, we don't become afraid and tell fables and pretend like we know stuff. We choose wonder and adventure. And that's very Frankl of me, right? We're choosing our meaning and making our meaning. We face that. We face that we don't know, but we choose the wonder and launch into our adventure. In the face of vanitas, it's easy to fall into despair and then try to fix it and then fall into despair and try to fix it. Then you're Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill every day. But once you accept that that's just the way it is, that there is no such thing as far as we can see humanly as a happy ending, then you stop obsessing about the ending and focus instead on the play. What are you doing today? Actually putting your adventure into play. So you look at your life and you give thanks for it, gratitude, and then you enter into your life as play. So from wonder to gratitude. And then finally with Rapax, what do we do with a world where it's dog eat dog? Well, it's easy to get mad, angry, and go on the attack. And pretty soon, we try to find the good people and side with them and fight against the bad people. And all of this is wrapped up with this myth of our own goodness, that we're not like other people, that we're the good people and they're the bad people. And so that's why we have to attack them and stomp them out. And that whole process, anger and attack, we face this rapax. There's this loneliness, or this rapaciousness to the nature of the universe. So we get angry about it and we attack to try to make things right. One of my favorite lines from Silverado, when Danny Glover says, "That ain't right. I've had enough of what ain't right." Well, that's it. I've had enough of what ain't right. I'm going to go smash the bad guys and all will be well. But of course, we can't smash the bad guys because we're made of the same stuff. The whole universe is built that way, as much as we might like to try to deny it. So the alternative to that where I see it as an existential choice, is to choose compassion. Accept face it, right? Face it. Accept that this is the way the world is, and choose compassion for others and express that in kindness. And so when you do that, it expands your world and your heart gets bigger. You don't shrink. Okay. So to summarize, there are three choices. In the face of Inyaros, we choose wonder and set out on adventure. In the face of Vanitas, we choose gratitude and enter into life as play. That doesn't mean light or frivolous. It just means that we have this energetic engagement with life that's not trying to hold on to it as if we could somehow, make our story or our game lead us to some final heaven ending or something like that. And then in the face of Rapax, we choose compassion and kindness. So this is very existential. It's instead of a story-based life, which most Western religion is story-based. There's some story, there's some narrative, big narrative, whether it's the Christian narrative or whatever one you're telling, rather than there being some story that gives meaning to life that we have to keep propping up, or even if it's, by the way, even just your own personal story about what you're going to do and be with your life that gives meaning to life. You don't start with the story as the foundation of your life. The story is the expression of your life. And it's an adventure played in kindness, right? That's what your story is when you start with a yes. You don't arrive at a yes to life because of a successful story. You start with a yes to life and express your life as this story. And the story's still there. You can have two people whose lives may look very similar in terms of what they're doing, but the person who is living from that existential yes to life will have a much more joyful, secure, peaceful experience of living than the person who is trying to build a story that will somehow justify their life. Stories are fine as an expression. They're just a lousy foundation. This is very existential. And I guess if you're, I really don't like labels. I mean, well, who likes labels? But sometimes I'm asked, well, what is sort of your philosophical bent, or what is the philosophical school that you identify with? And I guess if I had to choose one, it would be existentialism. But I prefer the term perceptualism, which you can go back, and a while ago I did a whole video on that if you want to take a look at that. But Camus, and especially Viktor Frankl, I think before I even knew what was going on, were leading me to this place where I am right now, where I would say I'm more happy than I've ever been. I'm more secure than I've ever been. I'm less afraid of dying than I have ever been. And it's because I start with yes. And my yes to life is not conditional. My yes to life, or put it this way, my yes to life is not the condition of life. My yes to life is the foundation of my life. Now you might go like, well, why yes? Why not no? That's a reasonable question, and you can say no. But I would say that if you say no to life, it's understandable as a human, but it's not natural. When I look at nature, I see everything in nature saying yes to life. From the blade of grass trying to grow in between the crack of a sidewalk. Like, why? Why not curse God and die? I always love those trees on the sides of the granite cliffs when I'm out backpacking, and I look at them and I just think, that's what I want to be. Even if I get, like, my life is on this rugged granite place that looks like there's no soil or anywhere to, I want to just say yes to life and find life as best I can and grow as tall as I can be. Nature says yes. And it's kind of unnatural to say no. So what will be your yes to life? What will that look like? It starts at the existential level with wonder, gratitude, and compassion, and it's expressed on the story level as adventures played with kindness. The story becomes the expression of your life, never the foundation. And in a very winding way, I can trace the roots of Facing Up all the way back to Viktor Frankl, and I'm really grateful for what he wrote, and just for the way that he took his talk about a horrible situation, took that situation and turned it into something that where he not only thrived, but his life became an inspiration to so many others.